I'm actually, what's funny, when you look at something like cephalization, when you look at the question of what the basement has been up to, etc., you're looking at a means of scientifically debunking any reason whatsoever why we would ever be pessimistic about anything. Because the nature of the universe is far different than what we actually centrally perceive every day in the things that we do. And so hopefully this class will get at that a little bit.
While you're setting up the dimension,
yeah.
I just wanted to mention briefly that, you know, I'm looking out at this meeting and I'm disappointed that there aren't more people here. But I want to be sure that the people who are here understand the massive movements that we've been taking in Diane's campaign. Just last weekend, we had 21 volunteers out knocking door to door in Diane's district, talking about her. She's currently had a lot of press, relatively, and she's working on so many different events that we're making a big impact in Bergen County. And so I really genuinely implore you to look at what can I be a part of this campaign process. Walking door to door is a phenomenal process. It feels wonderful where you knock down people's door and you say, I'm with Diane Sayre for Congress, and you are landing there almost as if an angel on their doorstep, because you're giving them an opportunity that they have no idea exists. People who are just beaten down and they don't believe that there's an opportunity ahead of them. And when you say, I'm with Diane Sayre for Congress, she's a Democrat, and they start to close the door, and then you say, she wants to impeach Obama, and they open the door back up, and they want to talk. So it's a really wonderful thing. We had a barbecue last weekend that was a lot of fun. We had about 25 people there, and please talk to us about coming out to do that, because it's going to be every Saturday and most likely every Sunday until the June 5th primary. And when she wins the primary, it's going to go on into November.
And today, by the way, we did have, I think a lot of the people who are usually in this room are actually with Diane's campaign in Jersey.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I clearly people did. There was some of the swaps.
Sure. And so we've hit about 200 houses. There's about 9 activists that were working today in the northern part of the city of Maywood. And so, it went relatively well. People were argumentative about the necessity to get Obama out, but one thing that they did really respond to was an allowance specifically. And you know, knowing that that is exactly what it is that we got to be doing. So that wouldn't help. I'll tell a quick joke to lighten the mood a little bit, because we are facing nuclear war, aren't we? So we might as well laugh a little bit. Okay, Barack Obama's sitting at a baseball game, and he's there in the front row. It's very loud. They're about to begin, but a Secret Service guy, you know, comes up to him and says that the team wants him to do something. He's like, "Huh?" He can't really hear him. He says, "Well, you know," you try to explain it to him. He's like, "All right." So he picks up Michelle Obama, who was sitting next to him, and throws her out into the middle of the baseball field. And she's like, "What the hell you do that for?" You know. And Barack Obama's just kind of sitting there looking at her in the middle of the field. And the Secret Service guy comes down and says to him, "Actually, Mr. Obama, what they want you to do is to throw out the first pitch."
That's pretty good.
All right.
Everybody knows the difference between Obama and God.
Everybody knows?
What is it?
Well, I heard that Obama had a great disappointment yesterday when he was in one of the countries for the conference that he was holding. Quite a few of his security guards were dismissed. They had to go back because there were charges of prostitution with them and so on. That's what I heard on the news.
I don't doubt it.
The difference between God and
they were sent back.
Obama is that God doesn't think he's Obama.
Yeah, I heard it on the news last night.
Well, that wouldn't shock
on
me.
the Channel 7 News that a group of security guards
about 20
that was supposed to protect him had to go back to the States because there were charges against them.
Well,
That they,
yeah.
you know, that they associated with prostitutes,
Uh-huh.
prostitution and so on. There
But
were charges against them.
So we want to go into Nawapa now.
Yeah.
All right.
And
That's
see
good.
the,
Doesn't shock me though, considering some of the things that have been coming out on Obama. But and the people have been dying mysteriously around him. But on a lighter note, we gotta let our view of the future govern what we think and how we act in the present. Because that's the way that actually human thought works.
can you speak a little louder?
Sure. I try. I'll put it this way. Imagine this. Imagine that you're a baby boomer. Not maybe, you know, you actually think like one. You may think that you don't, but you know, then you know all these pessimistic ideas come up. You voted for Obama and you see everything that he's doing. You know, meanwhile, you know, you're about to lose your job. Everything's going to hell. You're really enraged, and you start contemplating whether or not you're going to vote for Mitt Romney. Like, should I vote for this guy? And well, at least he's not Obama, you know. But I voted for Obama because he wasn't Bush, and oh my God, things are really falling apart, you know. And you're walking to the post office one day, and you see a couple of young people at a table that has a picture of Obama with a Hitler mustache, and next to it a picture of this thing called the Law. And what do? You don't engage him. You come up and you say, you can't change anything. You can't do it. You might as well not even try. You know, and you know, the young person starts to engage you a little bit, but you actually can't hear what they're saying. It's like the Charlie Brown thing and the teacher, right? and suddenly you find yourself saying the following thing: how old are you? Right? And this continues to go on in that way, right? And finally, somebody, you know, this person that you're, you know, that's trying to talk to you, hands you a picture of this, and your interest is engaged. Like, well, what is that? He describes a little bit about the project. He mentions that it's going to create 7 million jobs. He mentions it's moving of water. He may say something about the transformation of the biosphere, increased food, agricultural output, future generations. And you want to believe it, but there's something inside of you that's just like, this is never going to work. You know, isn't this kid worried about being shot? Right? All these weird things start going through your mind, right? Now, but you also are starting to think of objections as to why this is never possible. Now, in that frame of mind, I want people in here to tell me, why would this not be possible? Seriously, actually consider yourself a baby boomer and give me some objections.
It costs too much money.
It costs too much money.
It'll ruin the environment.
It'll ruin the environment. You know, the salmon in Alaska should have the right to gay marriage.
Yes.
In other words, right, yeah. Anything else?
People have poor vision.
People have poor vision?
Yes.
In other words, they'll never go with it?
No, they're not seeing, you know, it look like this thing could have been done.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Think about the future.
Yeah.
Not enough people will go along with your ideas for change. Many people will just follow their own lives and they wouldn't care. They'll show indifference.
Yeah. That's another one.
I believe that there's too many, it's like a blood clot, you know, they see this as a clot. And Obama's really a blood clot, and you gotta get rid of him. And they don't see, as long as they feel that there is some kind of opposition to what seems good, because this is a terrific thing. Not only will it include a lot of jobs in the high level, but on the low level. Because it does trickle down, but in a positive way. And a lot of people will have jobs, but they have to be inspired. And there's nothing on the radio and the media that inspires except people like us to talk about it. And if we don't open our mouths, and if you are worried about what people will think, but don't worry about what people will think. Because when I used to talk before, I used to put up little things up in Fowler, you know, the laundromat, and I'd see it in the garbage and the paper, so I stopped for a while. Then about a year later, I kept talking and talking, and I decided to try one more time. And then I pinned it up, and lo and behold, it's been there for a long time. And I says, well, people are getting the message. And also, when you talk to people, well, they say, well, it's the bankers. Before, you know, it was Bush, now it's the bankers that are doing this to him, and I get this from these Farrakhan people, and then I keep talking about it, and then they run out. And then one guy said to me, he says, you know something, everything that you're talking, you know, came out. And there's something to it, but he says, well, how is it going to work? More people like you get in on the internet that have a computer, or go out and see for yourself.
Yeah.
You got to inspire people. You got to do the motion.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I'd also thought of the ultimate in cynicism. It's like, yeah, I agree with Glass-Steagall, but you know LaRouche is never going to get elected. Sir, he's not running. Yeah, but everybody thinks he's a nut, but you don't think he's a nut. Yeah, but that's what everybody thinks. Things like that, right? Now, I would propose the following, that that kind of attitude is actually sense perception to a large degree, and looking at the things breaking out down around you. But again, the subject of today's class is cephalization, and I'll get into more of what that is, kind of a centralization of the structure of a biological creature. But it is basically clear scientific evidence when you look at the process concerning the history of life on the planet, that there really is no such thing as a perpetual breakdown. You might argue, well, if you put this thing together, eventually it's going to break down anyway. I mean, the Hoover Dam is breaking down, this is breaking down, that is breaking down, right? But life is actually, when you look at the question of cephalization, coming to a higher and higher forms of development and higher ordering, you know, biologically within the species, higher ordered biological structures. And this process actually mirrors exactly what the basement team is looking at in terms of mass extinctions and the development of new species like mammals from reptiles, for example, that have a higher energy flux density and efficiency to them. And this is also, when you look at this history of the planet and you look at what I'm about to present, this is a complete and utter refutation of the law of entropy. In other words, the second law of thermodynamics being a total and complete fraud. And I think that with the predominance of the second law being a scientific law in society, that this ultimately is the cause of pessimism. Because people just see their daily lives in terms of the second law, and you can think of examples, you know. And so what I hope this class actually ends up doing in people's minds is to crush the second law of thermodynamics and give us a means of actually talking to people, you know, to get them to see that if we have a negentropic economic process in the country, of which something like NWAPA would launch, then we can actually get out of this crisis. So that's kind of an introduction. Basically, the basement team's work in this and other things is saying that the universe is demanding this type of development from us, the type of development that NWAPA represents. And that even before mankind, the planet has been demanding something that actually thinks like it, that is inherently creative, that the increasing structure within biological species is ultimately leading to the foundations of the creation of mind on Earth. And it's universally demanding the existence of mind from its creatures. And mankind is the expression of that. And the measurement for this is the principle of cephalization, which was first talked about by a scientist by the name of James White Dana. And cephalization is that measurement. But just to give a rough idea of cephalization, it's basically an evolutionary dynamic, and I'm going to go through plenty of examples so we'll have a good understanding of it. An evolutionary dynamic which tends towards the development of a central nervous system, and also measures the increasing role of the brain in animals across different geologic spans of time. And so in the evolution of species, the entire form of the creature tends away from actual movement in terms of locomotion, like a horse with all four legs just kind of trotting around, towards basically limbs and other things in locomotion serving the mind. They're serving the biological function of the head. And basically, it's that principle of mind, though, when you actually see what the universe is demanding, that that actually is in operation. You know, constantly, you know, forming different upshifts, etc. So I guess one of the questions that I had, and I was looking at different scientists to figure this out, and I'll present this to you, is what's the nature of the universe and our planet, that this could even have the capability, right? I mean, well, like, does a planet have a mind? Is a planet sentient? Why is it that a planet is demanding anything? Can a planet demand something? You know, can the universe demand something, etc.? And I found all sorts of fun things just doing some work on some scientists that LaRouche emphasizes in his papers. And I wanted to share some of that with you to give a kind of a conception of what kind of planet we're living on. So I'll start with the first one, which actually, you know what, just to kick it off, would somebody read this quote? We can see it.
I'll read it.
Okay.
When man builds infrastructure, he is not simply placing some object called infrastructure into an empty box. He is actually reorganizing the physical space-time of the biosphere as a system by transforming and redirecting the biogenic flows through the biosphere, allowing it to attain to higher and higher levels of energy flux density.
Yep. This region of California used to be a desert way back.
Right.
Until a guy named William Mulholland pumped from the Owens Valley massive amounts of water to the Los Angeles area and created the Imperial Valley, which is one of the most productive agricultural centers on Earth, which consequently also transformed the climate of the area. It increased biogenic flows, in a sense. So let's look at this conception of what this planet is. This is from Kepler's Harmony of the World. It's a lengthy quote. It's from Book 4, looking at the question of the nature of the universe and the nature of harmony. And this is actually pretty interesting because he suggests that there is a sentient intelligence to our planet that would be able to comprehend the harmony. So does somebody want to read this one?
Yes, sir. It says Kepler and the whole and the world soul. Next, the chief soul into which these harmonies of the radiations flow is that called by the philosophers sublunary nature, diffused through the whole body of the earth, our nurse and rooted in some particular part of it, exactly as the human soul is in the heart. From it, as if from a hearth, fount, or inner sanctum, it emerges by its emanation into the ocean, which surrounds the lands, and the air, which is over both.
All right. Long one, like I said.
Now a man who is listening to the agreeable song of a good singer bears witness by the delight in his expression, by his voice, and by the clapping of his hands and feet, in time to the rhythm of the melody that he perceives and approves, the harmonic content of the melody. In exactly the same way, sublunary nature, by a remarkable and obvious commotion of the bowels of the earth, particularly on those days on which the wandering stars are in harmonic configuration with their rays at the earth, bears witness to what we have already said by way of preface. That is to say, that it has just as much power of perceiving the harmonic proportions of the angles by a kind of natural instinct as it has of heating and agitating the body of the earth and the underground workshops of its mountainous regions at certain times of harmony by natural faculty, similar to our natural faculty, so that they exhale a great amount of vapor and clouds, from which, through reciprocal production of cold on high, all kinds of occurrences in the sky are shapes. For this soul must be placed in the body of the earth, as in the harmonic angles of the rays exist in no other part of the world but on the earth, and the works of nature which follow upon the configurations of the rays take their origins from the bowels of the earth and the caverns of the mountains.
It's an interesting idea. Different harmonic confluences in the heavens, occur, and the planet then responds with earthquakes, volcanoes, things of that nature. It's almost an initial hypothesis about the role of cosmic radiation in these processes, as we're looking at with the 65 million year cycle. I'm saying that, in other words, the Earth itself has the capability, like a person hearing somebody singing, of conceiving of the idea of harmony. Pretty neat. And this one here is from Bernard Riemann's Philosophical Fragments, from this writer. He's quoting a writer by the name of Fechner. He's an interesting guy. I haven't looked too much into him, but he uses analogy and analogous reasoning to say that essentially the planet has a soul, or that plants have sentient souls and things like that. And what Riemann set out to do is to try to prove scientifically and rigorously that this was the case. This is one of the things he was working on. And so this is the reference to Fechner and his work. So does somebody want to read?
Okay. Riemann on Zen the Vesta, on the life of planets. Zen the Vesta is in fact a life-giving word, which creates new life for our mind, in knowledge as in faith. For like many a thought, which indeed was at one time powerfully effective in the course of development of mankind, but is now only preserved for us through tradition, Zen the Vesta arises now all at once from its apparent death to a purer form of new life, and reveals new life in nature. Now is the life of nature, previously only manifest on the surface of the earth, is immeasurably extended before our eyes. It appears expressively more sublime. What we considered as the seat of forces working senselessly and unconsciously now appears as the workplace of the highest spiritual activity. What our great poet has portrayed with prescient inspiration as the goal, which hovered before the mind of the investigator, is now fulfilled in a wondrous way. Just as Fechner in his manner seeks to demonstrate that plants possess the characteristics of mind, so the point of departure for his reflections in Zen the Vesta is the teaching that stars share characteristics of mind. His method is not to abstract general laws through induction in order to apply and confirm these in the explanation of nature, but rather to reason by analogy. He compares the earth to our own organism, which we know has a mind. He does not merely one-sidedly investigate the similarities, but also does as much justice to the dissimilarities. In this way, he obtains the result that all the similarities indicate that the earth is a being possessing characteristics of a mind, and that all the dissimilarities indicate that it is a being of a mind far greater than that of our own. The total impression of the picture unfurled for us of the life of the earth provides evidence for his view, and compensates for that which the individual conclusions lack in rigor.
Good. Now, this is from a later part of the philosophical fragments.
Apart from these aspects of organic purposefulness, there is still in man and animals, by common consent, and in plants, in Fechner's view, a closed lattice on interpenetrating and variable relations of purpose and action. And this purposefulness is explained by the existence of a unified thought process within them. According to the same principles, however, we must look for the reason behind the purposefulness which we perceive in organisms, and a unified thought process occurring in the earth on the following grounds.
Okay. Here's, I think the first one and the last one, A and D, I think are the most interesting.
A, the relationship of purpose and action characteristic of life on earth cannot be separated into separate systems.
Very important.
On the contrary, everything is interlocked. They cannot therefore be explained as several particular thought processes in various parts of the earth.
And D, which applies to what we're going to be investigating tonight, or today.
D, they do not persist throughout the life of the earth. Instead, new, more perfect organisms are always appearing. We must therefore seek the cause in a thought process that is simultaneously ascending to higher levels.
The thought process of the universe and the planet, in other words.
Yeah. The idea of progress.
Yeah.
Idea of progress.
As inherent in the way that the universe acts. Which is not just simply in the noetic domain, but in the process of the development of species. And one more quote from Vernadsky. Just to mention, the basement team came across James Dwight Dana and his work on cephalization through a translation of Vernadsky's Some Notes on the Noosphere, in which he was mentioned on this question. And here's one of the paragraphs, and I'll save the other one for later, in which Dana is mentioned by Vernadsky on this point. So anyone want to read?
Dana pointed out that in the course of geologic time, for example, throughout at least 2 billion years and probably much more, an uneven perfection or growth of the central nervous system, brain, is observed. It begins with crustacea, on which empirically stated his principle, then mollusks, squids, and ends with man. This phenomena he called cephalization. The level of brain, central nervous system, attained in the course of evolution never regresses, it only progresses.
Yeah. Think of this in the context of the other quotes. So we're going to look at cephalization. Look at the way that we're going to get at it is we're going to do a nice, fun, kind of pedagogical on the comparison of different species and their development. But let's go through quickly what the different aspects of cephalization are. This is James Dwight Dana. He's an American scientist around the contemporary of Darwin. And so here's the traits. 1, limbs transferred to serve functions of the head. That's the first thing when we go through the examples that I want you to look for. 2, limbs transferred from locomotion, in other words, walking, running, trotting, to serve cephalic functions, in other words, functions of the head. So there's a transference of locomotion to service of the head. 3, senses and organs are centralized to serve cephalic functions. This actually becomes very important when you look at the question of man. And we'll get into that later. You know, because I mean, flies, they taste with their feet. You know, moths hear with their abdomen. You know, but it's only, and there's even, you know, other funny things I'll get into, but it's only with the human being that senses become highly centralized. And 4, abbreviation, condensation in the back and front. In other words, kind of an idea of compactness of the structure. You know, from here to here, even, you know, things that occur in the increasing uprightness. And 5, forward rise in the cephalic end of the nervous system. In other words, you know, apes are down here, but with mankind, the head is at the highest point. So those are what we're looking for. So, just a quick thing on Dana too. I mean, he suggests that evolution never goes backward, and devolution never occurs. But this is, of course, a directed development. And so let's look at this stuff. We're first going to look at crustacean. So maybe turn the lights off. Sure. And the challenge here is to think of what forms on the page would be the most, you know, the highest in terms of cephalization. But we'll put 2 of them right next to each other. You have a shrimp on the left and a crab on the right. So somebody here, tell me which one is more cephalous.
I would say the crab, because the head is the highest, and that's where his brain would be, and it would be cephalization, you know, the nervous system to serve to the highest. Well, he doesn't have a mind, but a developed brain, which is in the head. Whereas the other one is more spread out. It would be like us in comparison with the lower animals, with the horses or lions or tigers, that they walk on all 4s, and all animals operate by brain. We do too, but they don't have minds. They cannot think. They, you know, they just live according to the jungle or eat. They don't even know that there's a universe or that they're living on a planet. But
the provocative thing about that, though, is that as species come to higher forms of cephalization, it's obvious that the universe is looking at a kind of a forward progression in terms of evolution. And every step of that cephalization process exists a demand for the existence of the human mind. So the precursor of the human mind is in the form of a horse, in the form of a tiger. They don't necessarily have minds, but it's already there. Because the next step up is going to get closer and closer and closer to the point that you reach man.
But
there's another thing about this, what I thought was interesting, is that a crab can exist both in the water and out. And the shrimp is primary. Shrimp cannot do that.
Yeah.
So it's a further development.
And what about the limbs? Like, what would the function of the limbs be here and there?
The shrimp has limbs for skittering, and the crab has limbs for picking things up and putting them in its mouth, and for attacking things and defending itself.
In other words, in Dana's words, you're looking at a being here whose limbs serve only locomotion and movement, versus the claws of the crab, which actually don't serve for locomotion at all. There's no terms of movement with the crab claws. But what the crab claws do, and the way the crabs feed themselves, actually serve the head, or serve the cephalic, almost exclusively outside of defending itself.
But if I may just add something, I believe that the human beings evolved from the monkeys, from the apes, not from any other animal. The apes are also the lower class animals, but they had something similar to the beginning of a mind, which became more acute, which developed when a human being, I would say, is actually the highest form of ape or monkey. Developed, you know.
We'll go in with
I don't think it came from the lions or tigers.
Well, we'll go on with
or
the
any
class,
other.
but I will say this. Dana disagrees with you and Darwin on that. And you'll see. I got it here. It's fun. All right, so let's look now to compare arthropods, insects, in other words, to crustacea. This is some examples you can look at with the crabs there. And we'll isolate two of them, the praying mantis and the crab we were just looking at. Now what's the big difference here?
The praying mantis has that quality of being, well, its head is more removed from the rest of its body. It's more, and you can see the sense organ of the antennae is located in the head.
Yeah. And they both have limbs that serve non-locomotion, but it's in the more highly developed nervous system that ultimately leads to something of a head of that form.
When I was a boy, I went to, people used to go to the roof. That was in the late 40s, early 50s, it was dying out. They had a lot of certain insects, you know, grasshoppers and so on. There was a big praying mantis walking on the edge of the roof, and I was eating a peach, and I had a seed in my mouth, and he was looking out. He turned the head as if to acknowledge me, and they seem to have a sense, suddenly, like a dog or something, because they respond to it. And I took the seed and I just rolled it at the edge, and he moved his head and he looked at it, and then he ran to it, he picked it up with his two clawed hands, and he was trying to eat it. And he looked at it, he's studying it. He looked at me and he could eat it. It's like if they have an understanding. A crab doesn't respond to a person.
Yeah.
It seems to be like a dog. And I've seen people.
They're fun pets, but they're killers.
Yes, I've seen them have walk around the shed.
You ever watch one eat a grasshopper? It's gruesome.
Oh, yeah, they're carnivorous.
Yeah. All right,
They once stopped traffic. It was in the paper. They had a fight with a bird. The bird beat the praying mantis, but it put up a big fight, and the traffic stopped. And they put a big fight. It lasted about 3 minutes or so.
Now we're going to look at some animal examples. And I just got to cue them each. Unfortunately, it's a pain in the butt. That's all right. The first animal, we're going to look at mammals. The first mammal we're going to look at is the blue whale. This is given even further elaboration of this kind of concept. So watch this thing. This thing's impressive. Let me get a full screen here. Now, as you can see, the center of locomotion for a whale is what? The tail, exactly. The tail end of the species. And it's just massive, huge muscles moving that giant thing all over the place. And in the meantime, though, if you look at the head, look at how flat it is. It's actually not very developed. In fact, the brain is somewhat deep into the body, and the brain is actually very small. So those two questions of limbs and also central nervous system would show you that this is actually not that cephalized of a species. Then you look at these guys here.
What, the rider?
That's another.
I think the horse wins this time.
That's another question of the dominance of the noosphere over the biosphere. You know, this quality isn't so good, but that's it. We're going to see him jump around. There's the horse. And notice what the tail doesn't do.
Locomotion.
Locomotion, exactly. It actually loses its function on the question of locomotion in comparison to the whale, right? But the locomotion is then moved forward in terms of a forward movement to the structure, just a little bit to the legs. And so the legs are what actually serves as the locomotion, while at the same time you can tell that the center of strength, for the horse is on the back legs. So you still have a kind of a structure that is in the hind area of the animal rather than into the front and starting to go into the head regions. Now this is my favorite video of them all. Well, Leona did a video, some people here probably saw it, it's called Demanding Mind. It's on this question of cephalization. And she mentions a lot of these examples, but there's one example she doesn't use, and that's the example of the tiger, which is actually brought up by James Dwight Dana. And there's a couple of very interesting things with the tiger. And I just found this totally fascinating. Cue it up. There we go. Okay, the first thing I want you to look at is his head. Now, one of the things you can see is that the snout, compared to the horse, is stuffed inward. It's starting to get flat. The face is getting flatter. And also you have a kind of a round squareness, in a sense, to the head. What you're actually seeing is the beginnings within evolutionary history of the formation of the human face. That's one point to make about the tiger. But now tell me something about the way his locomotion operates. You're going to see some wild stuff here. First off, where's the center of strength?
Legs. Rear legs.
The legs, but where?
Rear legs.
The rear legs?
Front legs.
Yeah, it's increasingly going more to the front legs. Look at the way he's grabbing. It's, a giant house cat or something. Where what he's doing is that the front limbs start to take on a new role. Yeah. I can't believe these guys are doing this. This is pretty funny. But the front limbs are literally taking on a new role in terms of their capability to grab and to wrap around.
Right.
Horses can't do this, right?
Well,
Now, this next one's funny too, because I guess his name's Ambam, the swaggering gorilla. And he's got a little psychological complex, I think.
Is he a narcissist?
Probably. But I can just let this one go. I don't have to cue it. There he is. See, the other gorillas don't like him, the first thing. As you can see with this little interaction here. Get the hell away from me, Who do you think you are? But here's his problem. He actually thinks he's more cephalized than he actually is. So he enjoys not only just standing on his hind legs, but occasionally taking that stroll around the park. There he goes. So the other apes obviously think he's high and mighty, right? But what's interesting about this is that now not only are you getting a more compactness of the face and more of a human kind of feature, but you're also getting the front limbs have an even greater function. not just simply grabbing things or a point of locomotion. They're actually de-emphasized in their locomotion. As you can see, the capability an ape does have of walking on two legs, but they're used for locomotion, but primarily it's the question of feeding. Again, a emphasis on the service of the head, right?
Pardon me, in all these animals that we saw, wouldn't the front legs be equivalent on them like our hands, arms are to us, and the back legs would be the actual legs like our legs are to us? Only they walk on all four of them, but when they want to grab something or so on, it would be like with the front legs. So you could also say that we have like front legs and back legs, but we're able to walk on only on our back legs, and our front legs are actually our arms that we grab things. But you could consider them like legs in a sense.
But what,
you know,
what would that say what would Dana say about that in terms of his criteria of cephalization? What would he then say about exactly what you said?
Well, I guess he wouldn't consider our front arms as legs in the sense that the lower animals are. He would consider them as a higher development, a different category as arms, and the other two are underneath are legs, actual legs. But I was just making a comparison, like with the lower animals, they have to walk on all four, and you could say that we have like four legs too in a sense, but we're able to walk on only two of them, so the front ones are not called legs, but they're called our arms, and that's all I'm saying really.
There's something very specific though that differentiates. Excuse the ridiculous sound of my volume, but it's pretty loud. There's something very specific though, because we do have limbs. These are essentially our front legs. But the first thing I'll say before I show you this is that do we use our front limbs, our front legs for locomotion?
No.
Not at all.
Only the back legs, the bottom.
So therefore, under Dana's criteria, we're a higher form of cephalization, if not the highest, because we've lost all function of our arms in terms of being front legs and locomotion. It's strictly in the service of the head, but there's a qualitative difference. Now, this creature, what are his front legs in service of? In this example.
Just
smile. Yeah, exactly. Which is what differentiates the human species from these other things that we're looking at. And front limbs, nothing to do with locomotion. Strictly in service of the mind. Right? And the other thing you notice is that the entirety of the form has moved underneath of the head. So where the head is at the highest point, absolute highest point within the structure, the highest possible position. And also, just to point out, the head and the brain, in terms of the energy required for their function, are actually a larger portion of the whole, a larger like proportion essentially than any other animal. And then also, what we'll investigate next, in the human brain, the senses are actually highly centralized at the same time. So we have a new form of the development of the central nervous system, which is, with the influence of senses the way they are, is leading to something entirely different.
Yeah, and with that, with what he's playing and so forth, you see that in the head, for the most part, you can see in his face, playing a piece like that. It's like the idea of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And so, according to Dana, James Dwight Dana, the human form is the most highly cephalized form possible. But Leona very provocatively asked the question, well, does that mean that the human species stops here? I mean, well, the species development, we're not going to get anything else? Now's the time for the second law to kick in, and we're all going to go die in a heat death somewhere? It'll be very hot if it's nuclear war. But, is that what's going to happen? Right? And I'll let you sit on that question, because there is something qualitatively different, a qualitative upshift that we'll discuss. But let's look at a quote from Dana directly. Somebody read it.
I'll read.
Okay.
The brain requires the higher development of the structure. It would hence appear that a prominent means of change of species is the action of influence of the brain. That the brain grows and changes and sends its changing forces through the animal, and that this gives progress or degradation, and hence it is that progress is exhibited in cephalization and degradation. In decephalization, we may therefore believe that all progress in grade, upward or downward, there was involved some changes in the animal structure of the kind expressing the degree of cephalization. Brain progress could not have taken place without structural progress. And with the brain eminently the growing organ, the brain progress would have had a determining relation to the latter.
Yeah. In other words, it was the existence of the brain, or you can make the leap and say the existence of mind, that is governing the advancement of the structure in order to support the existence of that more cephalic form. So now we're starting to hit a little bit more at the nature of this universe about us. We're just looking at this particular example. And so that's the ordering principle of development. Now we're going to look at brains, or lack thereof, as in this little creature, or Obama, Mitt Romney, the jellyfish of our age. That shouldn't insult jellyfish, that would. Anyway, yeah, let's look at the jellyfishes briefly. They have no brain, but they do manage to do everything that they need to do to survive, eating, mating, whatever it is. But, they encounter something warm, they send stingers out automatically, but there isn't any kind of connection as to what's going on. It's very not aware of where it is. It just moves its whole form towards whatever it is it's attacking. And what a jellyfish functions on is these things here. All it is a highly decentralized neural netting that doesn't have any kind of apex or brain type of structure to it whatsoever. It's just a bundle of nerves. And you get a somewhat more centralized structure with worms, but not exactly. But what happens when you cut them in half, right? They can actually regenerate themselves and form new heads, etc. And this actually is evidence to how decentralized the nervous system of the worm is, because it could just regenerate itself. And another qualitative leap forward, however, is the actually. Let me talk about this first. You can see in insects, arthropods, a different kind of development, in which you do have a nerve cord functioning as a kind of a, not quite spinal cord, but it's almost a centralized type of system, which runs along their abdomen, which culminates in what's not exactly a brain, but again, a bundle of nerves, a nerve center that controls the activity of the head, but doesn't necessarily control the rest. And so you see, as we jump up in species, more centralization. What do you get next? The vertebrates. There's some steps before that. But with the vertebrates, they introduced the spinal cord and the brain system integrated as a unit, right? And the more increasing centralization of the sense apparatus, even though there's variations between them, reptiles, birds, cats, and there's actually the sense centralization itself also varies. One example of that is the chicken with its head cut off, right? It's Mike the Headless Chicken, who lived 2 years after his head was chopped. So what it shows you, it shows you is that with a chicken, with a bird, that it's not exactly totally and completely in control of itself, because it has a less centralized nervous system. It's not quite, the apex is not quite the head. So let's look at the brains. And you can see, I mean, different examples, a chicken, a rabbit. It's a little bit tough to see, but what you're looking at is where the senses are originating from. Like, for example, you know, in the shark here, you have the olfactory lobe, which is smelling, all the way up there, the center of the center of balance, cerebellum, etc. Optic, which is visual there, medulla, I think that's here. And when you look, you know, go alligator, chicken, rabbit, and eventually you end up towards human beings, which actually have the most highly centralized set of senses and places where these senses originate within the brain. Now, somebody who's been studying some of the basement material, why would this be important? Anybody have a guess? In terms of the development of mind.
I don't think I understood the question.
Well, maybe I can rephrase it somehow. Or I can just give some hints. What I'm looking for is this. I mean, we have a centralization of the senses. It's obvious that the senses in these other creatures are much more decentralized. In other words, there isn't an influence on one on the other.
Well, what you're getting at is that with the human brain having the centralization of the senses, to have this different senses play against each other is the principle, is what allows us access to the principle of metaphor.
That's exactly what I was looking for. You hit the nail on the head. But there's physical things that happen that is interesting. Like we've done a lot of work, Liang Tang, in the extended sensorium report, did some work on synesthesia, which is the confusion of the senses. You know, people that can smell color. And people claim to be able to do this kind of thing, but you have almost a biological fusion. But what Daniel said is the key here, right? Because this structure is the key towards going beyond the senses towards mind, which is necessary in the discovery of universal physical principles.
Then the mind knows itself. And as you put it in metaphor, is, you know, you're talking about creativity, that you're self-conscious, where if you take a shark or an alligator and so forth, you don't have that.
Yeah, and part of this, I think, does, you know, without trying to reduce it, because the discussion of mind is a whole other thing. But part of this is supported, and this capability is supported by our cephalized structure.
Well, you could say that the mind interprets the senses. So the senses are part of reality, but they're not total reality.
Yeah.
They're like pathways to the mind. The brain interprets them, and the mind, you know, forms a more complete picture of them. They blend in to make a more complete picture of reality than the senses would do as a whole. They are reality, but not total reality. They're parts of reality, merging into the mind.
The great universal principles have been discovered based on the fact that two different senses in observed phenomenon contradict each other. And so therefore, the human mind makes a leap to actually try to understand what the cause is for that contradiction.
Yeah.
And this is what the subject of Kepler's Harmony of the World, which he's looking at the influence of sight, observations of the heavens, plus the harmonic intervals as they exist in different positions of the planets within the universe, to then come to a higher conception of the idea of harmony.
Well, I also want to say, could you say that in human beings, the brain and the mind are like the government of the body? That, they perceive everything that happens to the body goes to them, and you could consider them like they're the government of the human body. Just like the government of the country, the U.S. or any other country. You could say in a sense that the brain is the government.
I would also say that a lot of people that you need to go through some kind of process of impeachment. But anyway.
Louis.
Yeah.
For me, I find with the human brain, this idea of being able to reflect on things. You see something and, good or bad, you're just able to, with the brain, you're able to, if you do it right, you're able to step back and look at things as a whole and just reflect on things.
And you also, I think it goes to the heart of the idea of sense perception, that sense perception is not reality. And that man knows the universe not through his senses, but through the mind. And the senses are merely tools that will, teach us certain things. But there's a vast array of things that are always going on that you never see, hear, or smell.
Yeah. And even take a step back further into the domain of physical economics just for a second. If we have a process like what I just unfolded here going on within the history of the universe, then what is it that the universe is demanding of us, and what is it demanding that we use this gift of mind for? Sit on that for a little bit. I want to go through some of the things that I've written down.
Should we switch to what type of?
No, you can do that. That's fine. But I'll say this. As a whole, what you can see is through the increasing types of structure that we see occurring with mankind, etc., that the universe is demanding the existence of a mind. And that's why I say, you look at the tiger, you look at these examples. The concept of mind existed before human beings were actually developed by the planet and the universe as a whole. Because that's what the planet and the universe was actually striving towards. And you can see that clearly in this evolution of species. And basically the universe and the planet's sentient goal, self-conscious goal of this process of cephalization is literally to produce a being that can not only go beyond the senses through increasing control of them, but the universe is demanding from life a kindred spirit, in a sense. You can look at it that way. Man, who reflects the same power of mind that the universe itself has. And I wrote down some of the analysis that Leona had for her video. And what she basically outlines is that the root of science is the ability to realize that what you sense is not reality, kind of what we were talking about, but it's a projection. And when the senses contradict each other, we experience a motion of the mind which can begin to approximate the cause of the contradiction. And as a species, we begin to act on those causes rather than the projections of those causes. And this is the substance of scientific progress and the substance of the universe. We can do a fun little experiment. I mean, humor is like this, right? Good humor. I can tell an innocuous joke and I can tell a dirty joke. Which one do you want?
Innocuous.
Innocuous? Well, the innocuous one is this. Hamburger walks into a bar. And he goes up to the bar and says, can I see a menu? Bartender looks at him and says, well, I'm sorry, we don't serve food here. Are we sense-perceptual beasts? Why did you laugh? Yep.
I have this question. Do we all see colors the same way? In other words, if we're both driving cars and we see a red traffic light, which means that we must stop driving for a while, you and I would agree that the traffic light is red, not green. But would I see red the same way that you see red? In other words, if I would have to see the color red the way you see it, would I not see blue or some other color that I see? I don't think so, because I think if we both agree that the light is red, I think we both see red the same way. But I may be wrong, you know.
Yeah. And then we figure out a way to split light and therefore alter what we're actually sensing and perceiving.
Because otherwise,
and then figure out the causality of the color red.
Yeah.
You know?
I think we all see the same thing, you know.
Yeah, it's just not any what he's describing. I think it's just not, you know, we're not made in the sense of things being what you described. Like, we're not made, it's like in the area of like things being just arbitrary.
Yeah.
It's not like that.
Mm-hmm. Not at all.
Not at all.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think we all see colors the same way. You know, everyone would see red the way I see red, that it's the color red. But I may be wrong, I don't know. But I think if we all agree...
Eugene, let's finish the class.
Yeah, I think we all see colors the same way. Red is red.
Put something a little different. Look at the extended sensorium. We're creating satellites, massive, you know, electron microscopes or telescopes, everything you can think of, looking at the immeasurably large and the immeasurably small. And as we expand our ability to perceive centrally, we're starting to increase the density of these sense contradictions, which are going to lead to new forms of breakthroughs in scientific progress and development. And so what you're looking for is these contradictions. Right? And this is the contradiction that Kepler perceived through two senses.
You know what I was struck by, something you said earlier, which, you know, fits into this, in that the philosopher Leibniz says that he's looking for the difference between animal and man. And he says that that dogs, cats, tigers, and so forth have souls.
Yeah.
But man, he has a soul, but it's what's he call it? Intelligent.
Intellecting?
Yeah, an intellect with his soul that makes him a higher being. He says when a tiger sees a tiger, it sees itself, and it sees itself as like God.
Interesting. So, let's reiterate some of the arguments here. You know, mankind's existence is demanded by the universe itself. We're a species defined by evolving according to the same process as geologic time. But with the rate of increase and also the measurement of the increase of the rate of increase of human progress, we do this willfully, and that's the difference. This is Nawab. This is infrastructure. This is a Moon-Mars program. We can consciously and willfully make the decision to advance an evolutionary process even further, for the sake of the development of the universe, which is what I think the universe is actually demanding of us, this optimistic universe of ours. And of course, you say, well, okay, well, how do you propose and maintain a political policy that conforms with the way that this universe actually functions and operates? And it's the American system. But as far as the cephalization, you can think of it this way. Human evolution has actually, the means of our evolution itself, and this is why you could say, we're not just going to simply stop evolving, but the means of evolution itself has actually surpassed an idea of a change in physical form. I'm sure that little tweakings and things like that are actually going to occur, in geologic time and as we progress. But now it's a willful process. And now, because we have a goddamn fucking British Empire oligarchy that's out there trying to make people stupid and to essentially decephalize them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have this situation to where, there's got to be a small force of people out there who are trying to get people to not just simply, follow a policy or listen to Alex Jones and get all the information and start talking to people about Freemasons and lizard people and all. Yeah, okay, I got the information, I'm well informed, right? No. What we got to do is give people an insight into their self-conscious capability of being creative, which is the substance of real revolution. It's not how much you know about the fucking trade towers and the inside job or whatever. It's actually understanding the power of your own mind and the actual mission of the human species in the context of the way that the universe actually functions, which has been covered up and denied to us through our education. And so that will do it, I think. And I don't know if there's too much more to really say, I do have a couple more quotes I forgot, but I know we're, a lot of discussion we're kind of going over. Were you going to say, Chris?
Yeah, I was just about to say that what you described, the way the British mentality is, what you just described is like, of not getting people to think and so forth,
yeah,
and using their minds, is to get people to be superficial.
Mm-hmm.
Get them to be superficial, and that's their frame of reference.
Yeah.
To be superficial.
Sure, well, sense perceptive.
Yeah.
You can't change it. Back to the boomer that I described at the beginning of the class.
Right.
Yeah. Daniel, why don't you read this quote? This is Dana. This is James Dwight Dana. And I hope it kind of ties things together and get his attitude on this. This also goes back to this question of evolution. So, go ahead.
Dana and Darwin. It is of no avail to speak of chance variations. The use of the word chance indicates personal ignorance. Chance has no place in nature's laws, and can have none in nature science. Man's origin thus far has no sufficient explanation from science. His close relations in structure to the man-apes are unquestionable. The affiliations strongly suggest community of descent, but the divergences mentioned are hidden proof that he is not descended from any existing type of ape. Beyond this, the great size of his brain, his eminent intellectual and moral qualities, his voice and speech give him the sole title to the position at the head of the kingdoms of life. In this high position, he is able to use nature as his workmate, his companion, and his educator, and to find perpetual delight in her harmonies and revelations.
Oh, thank you.
The search for missing links has been carried forward with deep interest in recent years. Whatever the results of further search, we may feel assured, in accord with Wallace, who shares with Darwin in his authorship of the theory of natural selection, that the intervention of a power above nature was at the basis of man's development. Believing that nature exists through the will and ever-acting power of the divine being and all its great truths, its beauties, and its harmonies are manifestations of his wisdom and power. Or, in the words of Wallace, that the whole universe is not merely dependent on, but actually is, the will of one supreme intelligence, nature, with man as its culminant species, is no longer a mystery.
It's funny, you read some of these old writings and look at the words that they capitalize. Nature, man. These are, these aren't typos. These are actual capitalizations, divine being, etc. There was just a more divine, higher view of what man was.
Capitalization is it means the same thing as cephalization.
Yeah.
Capital
The
is
head.
the head.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty funny. So, I mean, let's read this one now. This is a last quote from Vernadsky. Somebody.
I'll read.
Okay.
Vernadsky again. In the 20th century, for the first time in history, man knew and embraced the biosphere, completed the geographical map of the earth, and settled all over its surface. Mankind has become a single entity in its life. There is not a single corner of the earth where man could not survive if necessary. Our stay on the floating ice of the North Pole in 1937 to 38 has indisputably proved this. At the same time, thanks to powerful technology and the success of scientific thought, thanks to radio and television, man can speak to anybody in any part of the planet. Flights and transport have reached the speed of several hundred kilometers per hour. And this is not the limit. All this is a result of Dana's cephalization, 1856, of the growth of the human brain and the work guided by it.
It's a comment on man as a global geologic force.
Right. The thing is, what Vernadsky and Dana do, and why Dan is important, is you have Darwin running around all over the place, basically saying, you are simply a more developed ape. You're an animal. All right, that's with this idea of, that you're just some more developed mammal than this beast over here. You're that beast over there. And he was obviously fighting against that, because this is the same time period that Darwin's running around spreading this stuff.
Yeah.
And there had to have been like a whole British operation, to shut down Dana. And while they were at the same time pushing Darwin. And once, for example, I saw a PBS special. That's even worse than football. But I saw a PBS special in the year 2000, and they basically said, what are the most important things that happened, and which scientists are the most important for the last 1,000 years? And the number one person they named was Darwin.
Yeah.
Out of anyone, they didn't even name Newton, they named Darwin. The man who views man as just another animal.
You're right.
And I think when you talk about PBS or anything like that, but the British role, I think the British role in all of this, in terms of looking at mankind and so forth, I think they've done a lot of work on this question of Africa.
Yeah.
A lot of work on this question of Africa.
Well, it's the ultimate expression of the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
And this all has an epistemological root. You know, all of this stuff. I mean, why would they destroy somebody like Leibniz, prop up Newton, or try to destroy the Curies like what Denise was going through, you know, a couple weeks back, and these kinds of things. You know, it's to actually deaden this Platonic conception of the way that the universe functions, so that people actually will be convinced in their, you know, rotting pessimism of their lives that there is nothing that you can do, and that things are just breaking down anyway, and that, you know, it's in the Bible, right? You know, this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna head for the hills, or buy a load of tuna fish, whatever. But and so it is a process of the beating down of the population,
Right.
And all of these operations are run specifically so that we don't have these kinds of conceptions. You know, luckily human beings actually happen. Mozart, Shakespeare, you know, God knows, you know, they're probably thinking, Jesus Christ, how did Abraham Lincoln get into the presidency? My God, you know, yeah, like, you know, this poet, we got to do something. Tear it apart, you know, or whatever, you know, like, we have these moments, and we have this tradition, we have what we represent, we got to be out there representing it. And, I do want to say just one thing about China-Russia cooperation, Arctic development. It goes beyond what Vernadsky is talking about, specifically there. And keep in mind, he had that optimistic viewpoint right in the middle of World War II. You can see by those dates. You know, they just absolute optimism about what the human species is capable of doing. And, you know, we have different things like the Russian Transportation Minister Yakunin calling again for the tunnel in the Bering Strait. You have Russia and China saying, okay, we want to work with the better side of the United States. You know, the election of Putin means that there's a nation-building faction within Russia. China's doing this stuff all the time. And what in that case is the role of Obama's World War? Why are Russia and China the target? To prevent the development of the human species along the lines that we're talking about. And that's why wars are fought. All wars. Every war you can think of actually goes back to that kind of idea. And so, yeah, you know, we have to get the opposite policy. And it brings you back, you know, in reflection, the entirety of the classes I presented it, looking at it in Willful, right? Think about that baby boomer that I mentioned. It's never going to happen, you know, it's in Revelations, whatever. Actually, I'll just bring this up. Alexandra, Diane's campaign manager, mentioned something in the discussion that she had at our barbecue, where one of our contacts was going through the tough things in her life and everything else. And it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that those tough things, you're going to give up by just seeing them and hearing different things. But that's a sense perception. When in fact, as I've outlined and hopefully gave an insight into, you have a universe that has a different idea. And that if you look at the contradictions in sense perception in a sense, but if you realize that underneath of the surface of things, which we should have the capability through our creativity to see it, there's another process going on underneath that ought to make us incredibly optimistic, not only just to be alive, but that we can have a future, you know, for our kids, grandkids, and all the way through. And so, again, the process of cephalization, it demands the existence of a higher form of creativity. And so you'd ask the question then, well, why Nawaba? It costs too much. Well, why Nawaba, right? It's because the universe is actually demanding it from us. You know, man accelerates the biogenic migration of atoms, using Vernadsky's term, you know, through the acts of his mind. The universe demanded the existence of his mind and demands from us, and consequently that boomer that I referred to, you know, it demands from us the use of mind to aid in its own development. So we have no choice but to obey the universe, or else we're going to go to extinct.
What are some of the,
That's what I got.
excuse me, what are some of the rivers that they have in Alaska, Canada? That's good to know because we know about the Amazon, Congo,
Can we turn on the light?
Sure.
you know, but those are going to be very important.
We have the Mackenzie and the Yukon river systems. That's what we're damming up to create.
They must be very big.
They're huge. They have a tremendous flow. There's more precipitation in that region of the country than anywhere else in the world, really. You know, going up basically from the Seattle-Portland area all the way up. And it's water that's just not collected. It's water that's not used. It gets dumped and shot out by the Yukon and Mackenzie river systems over and over and over and over again. We're actually, this project only takes about 20% of that flow coming from those river systems. 20% to irrigate the entirety of the deserts of the southern part of the United States. And to put water into Mexico, to replenish Canada's water, to clean out the Great Lakes, to refill the aquifers in the center of the country. 20% of that runoff.
Yeah. Mineral-rich water.
And with all of this, WAPA, even going back to things that Lincoln was doing, and, you know, hundreds of years ago and so forth. What it comes down to is the idea of progress. The idea that there is a faction fight going on. And it's like for people that we meet out in the streets, we're standing out there being one faction against another faction, and here's the population. What we're trying to get them to understand, hey, you can't stand back and watch this thing. You have to be a part of this. You have to be a part of this and move with us to change this situation.
Sure.